Around the same time that John D. Rockefeller seized U.S. media, he also hijacked U.S. medicine. When it was discovered that drugs could be produced from petroleum, America's top oil mogul ordered his army of propagandists to invert reality accordingly. Medicines used for thousands of years were suddenly classified as alternative, while the new, petroleum-based, highly addictive, and patentable drugs were declared the gold standard. After buying a German pharmaceutical company that manufactured chemicals of war for Adolf Hitler, Rockefeller leveraged his political influence by pressing Congress to declare natural healing modalities unscientific quackery. Rockefeller then took control of the American Medical Association and began offering massive grants to top medical schools under the mandate that only his approved curriculum be taught. Any mention of the healing powers of herbs, plants, and diet was erased from most medical textbooks. Doctors and professors who objected to Rockefeller's plan were crucified by the media, removed from the AMA, and stripped of their license to teach and practice medicine. Those who dared to speak out were arrested and jailed. When evidence began to emerge that petroleum-based medicines were causing cancer, Mr. Rockefeller founded the American Cancer Society, through which he suppressed that information. John D. Rockefeller is duly credited as the founder of the pharmaceutical industry, and the reason that medical error is currently the third leading cause of death in America. This is not an indictment against doctors. More than anyone, they are under the stranglehold of the single largest lobbying power in Washington. Every year, the pharmaceutical industry spends at least twice the amount as big oil to influence laws, policies, and public perception. Thanks to Mr. Rockefeller, the architect of American monopolies, no industry has more power over our lives than Big Pharma.
But it is starting. And so in 2022, I voiced my opposition against vaccinating children 5 to 11 years old with these vaccines. There had been a study that had come out that had actually suggested there was negative vaccine efficacy, meaning damage to the immune system in this age group, 5 to 11 years old. I posted it on Twitter. There was a study that I reposted, and within hours, my account was locked. I could not get into my Twitter account, and then about an hour or two later, I was informed that my account had been terminated due to misinformation, due to spreading COVID-19 misinformation. And I was locked out of Twitter, out of my account for an entire year. I was only allowed back on in February of 2023. And this was several months after Dr. Robert Malone and Dr. Peter McCullough had been allowed back on Twitter. I was held back for several additional months. I'm assuming that I was held back because the Canadian government probably put pressure on Twitter to keep me suspended, because the Canadian government has cracked down on Canadian physicians very aggressively in order to maintain the narrative that the vaccines are safe and effective. Everything has been done to protect the vaccines. And so the dozen or so Canadian doctors that have spoken up and that have stood up, one of the first Canadian doctors to stand up was Dr. Charles Hoff, who saw that his vaccinated patients were having blood clots. He did D-dimers on them and found that a very high percentage, something like 30 to 40% of them, had elevated D-dimers after taking the vaccines. He informed the health minister, and they have been trying to destroy him ever since. His clinic burnt down shortly after. He sent a letter to the health minister. In fact, his small town burnt down. I think it was blamed on forest fires or something, but effectively his little town that he practiced in as a general practitioner burnt down along with his clinic. He has recently been targeted for his license. There is a long proceeding that he's now being put through in order to strip him of his medical license. Same thing happened to doctors in Alberta. There was Dr. Daniel Nagassi, who tried to treat patients with ivermectin, and within 24 hours, he was stripped of all his emergency shifts. He was stripped of his job because he was doing part-time work in Alberta, and they've come after his medical license. Now he's given up his medical license. Same thing happened to a number of doctors in Ontario, Dr. Mark Trozzi, Dr. Chris Shoemaker, Dr. Mary O'Connor, Dr. Roshania Killian, Dr. Crystal HQ, Dr. Kalvinder Kaur. So there's these doctors who stood up, spoke up about the narrative. They've all been stripped of their medical licenses. Dr. Patrick Phillips as well, who's given up his medical license and his medical career. He now lives in rural Ontario on a farm, having given up his medical career because he stood up against the COVID-19 narrative. So Canada had a very extreme reaction to any doctor who'd spoken up. Now, in terms of, so I want to focus in